Well, we'll stay with these pictures, but watching this with me, the royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, welcome. Good to have your company after the state funeral in Westminster Abbey a few hours ago in London. The Queen has finally come home.
Indeed, yes. We have said, or are saying, as there is a committal at Windsor literally going on at this moment, which will be followed by a private burial. We have indeed said farewell to one of the greatest Britons, and somebody also who not only enriched Britain and the Commonwealth, which she nurtured, but the wider world. And I think that was testified to so vividly by the extraordinary
You are watching the new king in the procession following his mother, Queen Elizabeth, her crown sitting on her coffin. Well, today's service will be led in just a few moments by the Right Reverend David Connor, the Dean of Windsor. The blessing will be given by the Most Reverend and Right Honourable Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. The guests inside the chapel are listening to the organ scholar, Miss Miriam Beverley, and then Luke Bond will play music from Bach, Ethel Smythe, Herbert Howells, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and Judith Weir, the contemporary British composer. Richard, Windsor holds extraordinary historical and personal significance to the royal family, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Windsor Castle is not only the oldest inhabited castle in the world, but also this was the place where the Queen and her sister, Princess Margaret, spent the war years. She spent some holidays in Royal Lodge when a child, when the daughter then of the Duke and Duchess of York had no idea originally, of course, that he would become King George VI. And the Queen has always been especially fond of Windsor because it doubles in so many ways. On the one hand, of course, there's St. George's Chapel, the scene of the magnificent ceremony of the Knights of the Garter every year. And then there also, when she was based at Windsor, she tended to be in Buckingham Palace on weekdays and Windsor on weekends. But the particular week, it is said that the first week in the Queen's diary that was listed every year was Royal Ascot. And there she was based at Windsor in the traditional carriage procession, she, of course, being one of the world's equine experts. So Windsor has so many memories, including when she and Princess Margaret, this was when Princess Elizabeth, her first broadcast was from Windsor in the war years, and subsequently she's always been fond of Windsor, and in recent years, of course, the period of the pandemic and with advancing age, she has set up court at Windsor. So one of the reasons, in fact, that the Prince and Princess of Wales relocated to Adelaide Cottage was that they hoped their children would see more of Her Majesty. Very sadly, that was not to be, but it holds a very special place in her heart, and indeed historically too, with its links to the Order of the Garter founded by Edward III, and also renovation by Charles II, and an extraordinarily spectacular tourist attraction.
We're watching the state hearse halting at the bottom of the west steps of Windsor Castle. And in just a few moments, the coffin procession will enter the chapel. The bearer party preparing to carry Queen Elizabeth into the chapel, into the west door, and onto its procession to the choir. Richard Fitzwilliams, this is a very different service to what we witnessed earlier. That was the full state funeral, the ceremonial. This is a different, more personal service.
Very definitely so, and this will be attended by some 800, mostly members or former members of the royal household, or those with some connection with serving the royal family. In addition to that, the Governor-Generals of various realms and various Commonwealth representatives, and of course the members of the royal family. And I think that many people's minds, now we see this ceremony at St George's Chapel, will also go back to the period when the Queen lost her strength and stay, Prince Philip, and this is not what he would have wished, because he didn't want what he called the fuss of a state funeral. But of course, this was when he died during the pandemic. The nation's heart went out to Her Majesty the Queen, sitting alone and in the chapel as the regulations dictated.
We've seen the King and we've seen Prince Harry, but all of the royal family are now gathered there to receive the Queen, their mother, grandmother and great-grandmother, home to Windsor. As the bearer party approach the west door, the choir prepare to sing the first psalm of this service, Psalm 121. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. Psalm 121, music from Sir Henry Walford Davis, who was once organist at St George's Chapel in Windsor. Richard Fitzwilliams, it's been the most extraordinary day of extraordinary events. Your thoughts on watching these final minutes of Queen Elizabeth?
In fact, over the amazing life she led, and indeed the way the world has responded to her very sad passing. I think that you undoubtedly, she was a deeply religious person. This came across in the service at Westminster Abbey, as Archbishop of Canterbury said, that looking back over the way she served since 1947, when as Princess Elizabeth she swore that her whole life, whether it be long or short, should be dedicated to the service of the people of Britain and the Commonwealth. She served the wider world, and she did so brilliantly, nurturing the Commonwealth particularly, being the ideal, the consummate diplomat, and also constitutionally she was perfection, since no one knew what she thought, which was a great advantage. And now we're in this historic setting where most recent kings, queens have been buried. One's thoughts, I think, go toward what will happen privately this evening, where there will be a burial where she will be joined with Prince Philip, her strength and stay, because I think it was at the very, very pivot of what I would say was her greatness as a sovereign and as a human being, that she had support from him for the 73 years that they were married. And indeed, I think that today, with its magnificence, the pomp and pageantry which Britain's famed for, and the perfection, the timing, and the awesome choreography, a positive kaleidoscope of color, all of this is a wonderful piece of theater for the world to see. And also, I like to think that she would feel confidence, not only that King Charles is now ruling over us, but also that in the future, the Prince and Princess of Wales, one day William will become king, and one day George will. And we saw, and I think it was a very good idea indeed, to include Prince George, who's 9, and his sister, Princess Charlotte, who's 5, in the funeral procession in the Abbey, because this is the continuity of monarchy. There are those who question the hereditary principle. In reality, its benefit is that it places the ultimate goal of so many, being head of state, above party politics, and the Queen was an exemplar of one of the great benefits too of the institution. Not the power the monarch has, but the power she or he denies to others. She used hers, I would say, with absolute perfection.
The choir are singing the Russian lament of the departed. Russian lament of the departed, with the words translated by William Birkbeck and the melody edited by Sir Walter Parrott, who was another organist at St George's Chapel in the late 1880s. Richard Fitzwilliams, as we watch this event and other events taking place earlier today, I wonder what this says about Britain, the monarchy and the British people.
We have come together to commit into the hands of God the soul
what we
of His
see
servant Queen Elizabeth.
is something that is absolutely extraordinary. There's no doubt that the British people loved the Queen, and she never let them down. Indeed, this was something that they always knew. And one of the things I think that was so significant was she had dignity, she had presence, she had a wonderful sense of humour, she had a glorious sense of mischief. I know this, I met her on a few occasions. And also, I think that looking at the way that this was organised, I mean, she had obviously approved this, and the so-called Operation London Bridge was being planned for a long period of time by the old Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk. But the British people responded to someone who had served them over 70 years so well. And they did so insofar as they were able to, because had the coffin lain in state in Westminster Hall for longer than 4.5 days, I'm certain that there would have been many, many hundreds of thousands who would have been able to pay homage. But they lined the streets. We saw today London packed with hundreds of thousands of people, and in Westminster Abbey, representatives from throughout a world that is the poorer for the passing of the Queen. And President Macron put it very well, that it may be that she was the British Queen, but she was, so as to speak, the Queen to the rest of the world. I think the British people also have a fondness when it comes to the monarchy. It goes back over 1,000 years by Cromwell's protectorate. It's very much in our DNA. And whereas, I mean, obviously the last scenes of this sort, you have to think back to 1952 with George VI and anything comparable. Equally, of course, there will be those who go back 25 years to the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, which was so tragic. She was 36, and of course there was this outpouring of grief. But all of this links the British people in a very, very strange bond with their monarchy. I think that it is beneficial. I think that also being above party politics and being a symbol of national unity, especially at times of such difficulty and unpredictability.
Richard, I'm going to interrupt you there and thank you. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. The choir are now singing the hymn, All My Hope on God is Founded. And while we watch those pictures, we will also remind you of two congregations here, one inside, the close family and the VIPs, but another outside those walls,